Welcome back to the Thinking Global channel. Today, we're diving into a place most people couldn't find on a map, yet the entire global economy hinges on it. The Strait of Hormuz, a narrow stretch of water just 33 to 39 kilometers wide at its narrowest point, but wide enough to contain the ambitions of empires, the scars of colonialism, and the very seeds of global conflict. If this vital corridor were to be blocked one day, your gas prices wouldn't just rise, they'd explode. Its markets would crash, and military powers would scramble. But why does so much power rest on this one point? And why does it continue to be a flashpoint for imperial intervention? Let's break it all down. The Strait of Hormuz connects the Persian Gulf to the Arabian Sea and the broader Indian Ocean. On one side, Iran. On the other, the United Arab Emirates and Oman. It is the only sea passage from the oil-rich Gulf countries to the open ocean. In other words, if you're talking Gulf oil exports, you're talking Hormuz. Every single vessel leaving the oil-rich nations of the Gulf, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, and the UAE, must pass through this bottleneck. This geographical reality, a gift of nature, has been transformed into a strategic vulnerability, not for the region itself, but for the insatiable demands of a global economy built on fossil fuels. Here's the number you need to remember. Approximately 1/5 of the world's total oil consumption, that's between 17 and 21 million barrels daily, passes through this strait every single day. That's an astonishing $1.2 billion worth of oil flowing through this channel every 24 hours. It's much of it heading to energy-hungry nations like China, India, Japan, Europe, and even the United States itself. But it's not just oil. It's natural gas, LNG tankers from Qatar, and countless trade vessels make this a key artery of the global economy. The entire globalized energy market, based on just-in-time delivery, cannot function without the Strait of Hormuz remaining open. This tiny maritime corridor is not just important, it's indispensable. To understand the present, we must confront the past. The history of the Strait of Hormuz is not one of peaceful commerce. It is a chronicle of foreign intervention and colonial ambition. The imperial interest in the region goes back centuries. From the Portuguese in the 16th century, seeking to control trade routes, to the British Empire, consolidating its grip on the jewel in the crown, India, the strait has always been a prize to be seized, never a passage to be shared on equal terms. The discovery of vast oil reserves in the early 20th century only intensified this imperial obsession. Western corporations, backed by their governments, carved up concessions, installed puppet regimes, and ensured that this black gold flowed not for the benefit of the local populations, for the engines of Western industrialization and prosperity. The so-called independence of many Gulf states often meant little more than a transition from direct colonial rule to a more subtle form of neo-colonial control, where foreign powers continued to dictate economic and strategic policy. This pattern of external manipulation continued long after formal colonialism. In 1953, the CIA overthrew Iran's elected Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh after he dared to nationalize Iranian oil. That single event reshaped the region. The Shah, backed by Washington, ruled with an iron fist until the 1979 revolution. When the Iranian people finally rose up against decades of foreign-imposed tyranny. After the revolution, the U.S. lost its grip on Iran, but it didn't leave the Gulf. Instead, it doubled down, building military bases in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, the UAE, and Oman. Today, the U.S. Fifth Fleet is headquartered in Bahrain, just a few hundred kilometers from the Strait of Hormuz. Their stated mission? To keep peace, but peace for whom? And at what cost to the sovereignty of the region? During the 1980s Iran-Iraq War, the so-called tanker war unfolded in the waters of Hormuz. Both sides attacked oil tankers, and the U.S. entered with Operation Earnest Will, flagging Kuwaiti ships and escorting them with U.S. Navy vessels. A supposed act of defense? Or a thinly veiled oil protection racket, securing Western profits under the guise of freedom of navigation? Despite this heavy U.S. military presence, the geographic reality remains. Iran has de facto control over the northern half of the strait, and that fact terrifies Washington. Iran, a sovereign nation, controls one side of this vital waterway. Its security is intrinsically linked to the strait's stability. Yet it faces a constant barrage of threats from a foreign naval presence. The U.S. Fifth Fleet, headquartered just across the Gulf in Bahrain. Imagine if a powerful foreign navy were permanently stationed off the coast of New York or London, dictating terms and imposing its will. Would that be considered stability or an act of profound provocation? Iran has repeatedly warned, if it is attacked, or if its oil exports are blocked by sanctions, will shut down the Strait of Hormuz. It has the capacity, naval forces, missiles, and asymmetric tactics like mines or swarm boats. This is presented by Western media as aggression, as Iran being a rogue state threatening global energy supplies. But think about it. Iran is constantly threatened with sanctions, regime change, and military strikes. And yet, it's Iran that's accused of destabilizing the region. The real destabilizers are the ones with aircraft carriers, bomber fleets, and drone bases stationed thousands of miles from their homeland. This is not about stability, it's about domination. The U.S. uses the freedom of navigation argument to justify warships patrolling waters on Iran's doorstep. But when has freedom of navigation ever meant freedom from imperial control? The U.S. military presence is nothing less than a show of force, a projection of power designed to maintain the existing unequal global order. It's about ensuring that the flow of oil, primarily for Western consumption, remains uninterrupted, regardless of the cost to regional stability or the sovereignty of nations like Iran. Every Iranian missile test, every naval exercise, is framed as an act of aggression, while the constant presence of foreign warships is normalized as a benevolent safeguard. This is the classic imperialist double standard. So what happens if the Strait of Hormuz is closed? The immediate impact would be catastrophic. Imagine the world waking up one morning to news that 20% of its oil supply has suddenly vanished. First, oil prices would skyrocket, possibly over $200, $300, even $500 a barrel within days. This isn't just about the cost of filling up your car. It permeates every aspect of the economy. Transportation costs for goods would explode, manufacturing processes would grind to a halt, and inflation would spiral out of control globally. Countries like India, China, and Japan, heavily dependent on Gulf oil, would see immediate economic crises. Sustained closure would almost certainly plunge the world into a deep recession or even a depression. Businesses would collapse, unemployment would soar, and social unrest would likely follow in many nations. Global supply chains would be thrown into chaos. Energy importing nations would face severe shortages and rationing. Airlines would halt flights. Industrial production would slow. Alternate routes? There are few. Saudi Arabia has pipelines that bypass the strait, but they can't handle even half of the current flow. The infrastructure isn't ready and the markets know it. It would be an economic earthquake, and yet the threat doesn't come from Iran. It comes from a system that relies so heavily on this one choke point and refuses to negotiate regional security with the actual countries of the region. The West's obsession with Hormuz isn't about freedom, it's about control. When Iran talks about defending its borders, it's a threat. When the U.S. sends destroyers halfway across the world, it's security. This double standard has consequences. The same powers crying about Iranian aggression are arming Saudi Arabia to bomb Yemen. They talk of peace while recognizing illegal occupations like Israel and imposing sanctions on entire populations. This isn't diplomacy, it's imperialism with a press release. The narrative often points to Iran as the primary threat, citing their past warnings. And indeed, Iran has repeatedly stated that if it is prevented from exporting its own oil due to sanctions, it would consider closing the strait in retaliation. This is presented as an act of irrational aggression. But isn't it also a desperate measure by a nation under siege, a last resort to defend its sovereignty against an unrelenting campaign of economic warfare? The underlying message here is clear. The global economy, as currently structured, is profoundly fragile and deeply dependent on the goodwill, or rather, the enforced compliance of nations like Iran. The system is designed to be vulnerable, allowing powerful states to wield this vulnerability as a weapon, to ensure their continued access to cheap resources, regardless of the human cost. But the world is changing. Countries like China and Russia are building pipelines to bypass Hormuz. The global south is rejecting the US dollar in oil trade. The era of Western control is ending. The Strait of Hormuz is more than a shipping lane. It's a symbol of resistance against foreign domination. It is a microcosm of the global power struggle, laying bare the hypocrisy of a system that preaches free trade and freedom of navigation while simultaneously imposing crippling sanctions and maintaining a vast military presence to ensure its own unfettered access to resources. The constant fear-mongering about the strait's closure serves a specific purpose: to justify continued military intervention, to maintain the status quo of resource extraction, and to demonize any nation that dares to challenge the imperial order. The path forward isn't more warships. It's regional diplomacy, economic justice. It's in the end of a system where the powerful decide who gets to trade, who gets to live in peace, and who must bow. As long as the empire clings to control, Hormuz will remain a fuse waiting to be lit. True stability in the region will never be achieved through military might and foreign intervention. It will only come through respect for national sovereignty, through diplomatic engagement, and through an end to the cycle of sanctions and regime change attempts. Furthermore, the world desperately needs to accelerate its transition away from fossil fuels. Our addiction to oil is not only destroying our planet, but also perpetuating these dangerous geopolitical games. Investing in renewable energy is not just an environmental imperative. It's a strategic necessity for global peace and security. Imagine a world where the Strait of Hormuz is no longer a choke point of fear and control, but simply a passage for goods and people, free from the shadow of warships and the dictates of imperial ambition. The narrative of Iranian aggression is a smokescreen. The real aggression lies in the sustained economic warfare, the military encirclement, and the relentless pressure to conform to a global system that disproportionately benefits a select few. The Strait of Hormuz reminds us that true security does not come from controlling others, but from fostering genuine cooperation and dismantling the very systems that create these perilous dependencies. It's time to stop allowing imperial powers to dictate the terms of global energy and to demand a future built on justice, sovereignty, and sustainable peace. The question isn't if the Strait of Hormuz will become a flashpoint, but when. And when that day comes, the world will see the true cost of imperialism. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel to keep thinking the world how it really is.